of Law and Crime Daily. We're updating you on some of the bombshell developments from the newly released probable cause affidavit in the murder of 4 college students. Plus,
this is State of Idaho versus Bryan C. Kohberger.
The suspect appears in front of an Idaho judge to hear the heinous charges against him as parents of the victims look on.
It's obviously an emotional time for the family seeing the defendant for the first time.
And experts help provide clarification and insight on what's next for the investigation and what we still have not learned.
Doing things fast is not as important as getting things right.
Law and Crime Daily, covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome, everybody, to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Jesse Weber. Bryan Kohberger, the man accused of slaughtering 4 University of Idaho students inside of a home, will stay behind bars. We are bringing you the biggest takeaways from Thursday's shocking probable cause affidavit released just before Kohberger's first Idaho court appearance. So here's a look at what we're going to be analyzing over the next 30 minutes. We now know that one of the surviving roommates was actually inside the home and awake when the suspect walked right past her, plus how DNA evidence and a print found at the crime scene helped police get closer to the suspect. And the Hyundai Elantra that police had been been on the lookout for, that was spotted multiple times near the victim's home. But what did the affidavit not tell us? What information is still missing? And where do we go from here? Well, to help answer that, I'm joined by my co-host and 2 legal professionals, public defender Brian Buckmeyer and former trial attorney Terry Austin. We're going to be breaking this down for you piece by piece. But first, we got a better look at Bryan Kohberger Thursday as he sat in an Idaho courtroom for the very first time. During this initial appearance, he answered a few of the judge's questions, heard the charges against him, and he was denied bail. Law and Crime correspondent Anjanette Levy was inside that courtroom, and she joins us now from Latah County, Idaho. Anjanette, walk us through the hearing.
Well, Jesse, it was a very brief hearing, less than 15 minutes. And this is really a hearing where the judge reads the charges against Bryan Kohberger to him and asks him if he understands and asks him about whether he wants appointed counsel. He has appointed counsel. A public defender here in Idaho is representing him in this case. He walked in, he sat down. He didn't show any emotion. People have been asking about that. He answered yes when the judge asked him if he understood the charges very succinctly. It was very sad, though, to watch the victims' families in the courtroom. Kaylee Gonsalves's mother and father were in there, and before the hearing started, Steve Gonsalves, Kaylee's father, brushed some hair away from his wife's face and then just gently kissed her on the side of her head, just in a really loving, comforting way. When the charges were read, Christy Gonsalves started crying, as did another family member sitting next to her. So it was just a very sad thing to witness as these families prepare for this long legal journey. Ann Taylor is the public defender representing Bryan Kohberger. She said she wanted to note when asking for bail whether that he has a family that supports him. She said that he should get some type of bail. The prosecutor here in Latah County, Bill Thompson, said no, he's not eligible, so he is being held without bail, and they are pursuing the death penalty in this case. That is a possible punishment should Bryan Kohberger be convicted of these crimes. Following the hearing, the attorney for the Gonsalves family made a statement outside of the courthouse.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Shannon Gray. I'm the attorney for the Gonsalves family. We're not going to be taking any questions at all. It's obviously an emotional time for the family seeing the defendant for the first time. This is the beginning of the criminal justice system, and the family will be here for the long haul. And that's the statement for the media today. Thank you.
And they will be in for a long haul. Since this is a death penalty case, and we know that this was a 7-week investigation, an investigation that is certainly continuing, there's still a lot of evidence that the defense attorneys will have to obtain through the discovery process. They'll have to wade through that and look through it. And so this will be possibly a very long process as we head toward that next court date, which is a status hearing on January 12th. Jesse?
Anjanette, great reporting. Thank you. A whimper and a loud thud. That is one of the lines from the probable cause affidavit that really stands out. This audio was recorded by a security camera near the home after 4 a.m. the night of the murders. One of the surviving roommates, who was identifying as DM, said that she thought she heard someone say, "There's someone here." Then later, she thought that she heard crying coming from Zana's room. She opened her door and heard a male voice say, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." When she opened the door a third time, she says she saw a person in black clothing and a mask walking towards her. She said that she was 5'10" or taller, not a very muscular male, bushy eyebrows. She said that she froze up and he walked right past her. After that, DM told investigators that she locked herself in her room. No one called 911 until the afternoon. Brian, I got to get your perspective on this. I mean, the description that she made, does that Kohberger?
I think so. Like, I know what the defense is going to say. It's late at night or early in the morning, depending on how you want to look at it. Maybe she was drinking the night before. Maybe she was intoxicated. Maybe she was sleepy. All of those things are probably going to come up in the defense's mind. But I look at those bushy eyebrows in Kohberger. I look at his frame. I look at his size. She seems to have him down to a T. And if she's saying that he's walking right past her, she has every opportunity to see every description. That's going to be a hard case.
Terry, real quick, 30 seconds. Why did he not attack her?
You know, I think he was afraid of getting caught. He did the murders. He was looking to get out. He didn't want to be identified. If he stopped and did another murder, cameras could have been in that hallway and they could have identified him even further. So I think he just said, let me haul tail out of here and maybe I can get away with this.
Just lucky to be alive. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, our coverage of the Idaho College student murders continues as we break down new information disclosed in a new affidavit, including what we now know about the search for a DNA match and how police connected Kohberger with the Idaho crime scene. And welcome back, everybody. We're continuing to explore the newly released affidavit in the Idaho College student murders case, and we can't leave without the use of DNA and prints to identify Bryan Kohberger. The affidavit states that a latent shoe print was found outside the door of DM, one of the surviving roommates from the attack. The shoe print had a diamond-type pattern, diamond-type sole pattern, similar to a Vans shoe. Now, the print matches Kohberger's point of travel that the roommate described to law enforcement during their alleged encounter in the home. When it comes to DNA, the Idaho State Lab located a single source of male DNA on a button strap, or button snap, I should say, attached to a tan leather knife sheath. That sheath was found on Madison Mogan's bed next to her body. Kaylee Gonsalves was found dead next to Mogan in the same bed. The same lab used trash recovered from the Kohberger family residence in Pennsylvania to pin down the suspect. You see, the trash was a probable match for the biological father of the DNA found on the sheath at the scene. But is that enough to get a conviction? Well, forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan came on the program Thursday to talk a little more about it.
This would have been an overwhelmingly exerting physical activity he would have been engaged in, just slaughtering these people. Adrenaline is up. There would have been muscle fatigue at this point. He would have been spent essentially by this point in time. So I think that they're considering all of this, a deep dive into the fiber and molecular evidence contained in that Moscow residence is going to be required, and they're going to have to look through every area of that house to see if maybe he had been there before, because they can find, in fact, touch DNA in those locations. I'd be very curious to find out if they're going to be searching through closets, all these places where he could have hidden. And all it takes is to draw just a bit of DNA that's connected back to these victims. How's the defense going to explain that away? How do you explain, you might be able to do it with one person, but if you get a collection of 4 individuals that you've never met or they've never crossed paths, how do you explain that away?
Brian, explain to us better what we're talking about with the DNA that's used to connect Kohberger to the murders, and do you think that is a strong connection moving forward?
I mean, JSM is doing my job right there, because I'll be honest, when I look at these cases, I think, all right, I'm a defense attorney. How do I break this case apart and prove that this person is innocent? I can't in this case, because what they're doing is they're taking that sheath that's a part of the murder weapon and left at the scene next to one of the bodies of the victims, which is great evidence for the prosecution and the police, and they're connecting to the trash in his house. And if they can find similar DNA of a victim on him, like JSM said, I don't know a way to break this apart because they're connecting so many breadcrumbs that all lead back to Kohberger, and that's just the DNA. We're not talking about the other pieces. So I think this makes it a dangerous case for the defense, but a great case for the prosecution.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's talk about, Terry, about that shoe print evidence, right? Is that going to be even admissible? Do you think it's strong?
I do think it's strong. It may not be as strong as that DNA, but they have a unique shoe print. They said it's diamond shaped. They said it's like a Vans shoe. You better believe they're going to be looking for those shoes. And even if Kohberger threw the shoes away, he could still have purchased those shoes. If there's a store that sells Vans, they're going to be going in and out of those stores looking to see if they can find receipts. And so, you know, if they can tie him to that shoe print and to that shoe, there is another piece of evidence right there that that jury can connect to Kohberger. And we've seen it done before. If you remember in the Pike County massacre, we saw George Wagner. He was convicted, and part of the evidence in that case was a shoe print. So they didn't find the shoe there. They may not find the shoe here, but it could be one of those connective dots to convict him.
This might not be the strongest, but maybe even having him on surveillance footage of some kind wearing Vans shoes that match that kind of description may be in and of itself important, but we'll see. Well, I'll tell you what, you're going to definitely want to stay with us as our special coverage of the probable cause affidavit in the Idaho college student murders continues. We're breaking down how Moscow police connected Bryan Kohberger to that now infamous white Hyundai Elantra and why the car itself could be so important. Welcome back, everybody. As we follow brand new details on the Idaho college student murders case, we want to talk about how police were able to track Bryan Kohberger and connect him to the home on Kings Road, which is not far from the University of Idaho. Nearly 2 weeks after the murder, Moscow police put out information about a white Hyundai Elantra that they were looking for, something that we reported here on Law&Crime Daily. On November 29th, a Washington State University officer spotted a white Elantra in the parking lot of an apartment complex. Kohberger was part of a doctoral program at WSU, and the car came back registered to him. The car was spotted on several cameras near the home, including driving by the house 3 times before the students were killed. 16 minutes later, that same car was seen speeding away from the crime scene. Police also tracked Kohberger's cell phone use. The officer who wrote up the affidavit says that Kohberger's phone used the same cell phone tower that provided coverage to the victim's house at least 12 times prior to the night of the murder. Between 2:47 a.m. and 4:48 a.m. on November 13th, police allege that Kohberger turned off his phone to try to conceal his location. When it comes to proof that Kohberger was connected, investigator Joseph Scott Morgan says that the car itself is a critical piece of evidence.
One of the things I'm very interested in as a forensic science guy is that car. That car is a rolling crime scene in and of itself. And it has to be handled with kid gloves at this point. So they're going to take this thing apart piece by piece, and they're going to use every kind of technology that you can imagine on this thing, everything from alternative lighting to luminol or blue star or whatever they're using. They're going to take samples from all inside of this thing, because it doesn't matter how hard you try to clean one of these things, you are not going to escape what we're capable of doing in forensics and recovering molecular evidence.
Is Joseph the best? I really think he's the best. He explains it so well. So Bryan, Kohberger's phone was supposedly turned on and off during the night of the murders. Explain to us how the affidavit is showing that and why it's so important in this case.
I mean, Jesse, before the show, you said it best. Why didn't he just leave his phone at home? This is probably the biggest part of consciousness of guilt that the prosecution is going to wave as a massive flag, whether it be throughout the case, at trial, and if we get there, at sentencing. This shows consciousness that, hey, I've been here 12 times. Not only does my cell phone, but photos of my vehicle that correspond to the time that my cell phone is pinging off of these towers show me going from point A to point B. Don't forget, his school at WSU and that of Idaho University are only about 10 miles apart, and it's a small town area. They're college towns. And so getting from point A to point B, you usually take typically the same type of roads. And so the ability to track the vehicle and the phone is huge. In law school, we learn that arguments are like bundles of sticks. Each individual argument may be able to be broken, but if you put them together, they're almost unbreakable. This case is a bundle of logs. Any one of these arguments could take down the suspect here, Kohberger. And when it comes to tracking not just cell phones, because usually we get one or the other, but tracking cell phones and cell phone and cars, and putting them together and showing the path as he turns off his cell phone going towards the victim's home during the night of the shooting, and then turns it back on as he's leaving at the exact time of the killing, I think that could bury him.
Oh, yeah. I mean, your phone just happens to turn off at the exact point. But Terry, I'll tell you, it's not clear whether the police have the cell phones of other family members. Do you think that evidence could provide some information?
Well, let's hope they've got everybody's cell phone. The affidavit did mention, obviously, they have Kohberger's cell phone, but they had DM's cell phone, and they have at least one of the victims. I think it's safe to assume that they have the cell phones of all of the victims. But I think just as important would be the cell phone of all of the people in that circle close to Kohberger. So, for instance, the mother, I mean, was she texting anyone? We know that she was in court at one point. She was very upset. Does she know something? The father, he was in the car when they were driving from one point back to Pennsylvania. So does he know something? Did Kohberger text his parents? You know, that could show consciousness of guilt, and it would be admissible in court, particularly if it's an exception to hearsay, like maybe there's an admission there. So I definitely think it's important to look at all of those other cell phones.
And someone could come forward and said, hey, I had an odd conversation with Mr. Kohberger at a point in time. Remember, that can come in too. And if he says anything in jail, that can come back to hurt him as well. When we come back, a look at the highest priority questions that we still don't have answers to, plus why those who complained about a lack of information from police may have a little crow to eat right now. Welcome back to Law&Crime Daily and our in-depth coverage of the unsealed affidavit in the murder of the Idaho Four. There is a lot of information that we learned from that document that really stopped everyone in their tracks, but there's also a lot of things that we don't know. Law enforcement consider Bryan Kohberger as the sole perpetrator in the murders, but we still don't know if the 28-year-old Pennsylvania man has anything to do with the college students living in Idaho. We do know that he was studying at Washington State University, but exact connections haven't been made. Earlier this week, we learned that the victim's parents are working with law enforcement to try to connect those dots. The affidavit also mentions just one piece of DNA at the crime scene connecting back to Kohberger, the knife sheath found on Madison Mogen's bed. With the victims found brutally stabbed in two separate locations, there are potentially more clues in the home. On Thursday, we heard from trial consultant Sonny Slaughter, who emphasized the importance of justice and also patience in this type of case.
Doing things fast is not as important as getting things right. And right now, it's important not for the public as much as it is for the family of Kaylee and Madison and Zaina and Ethan to know that justice is working in a process that will hopefully secure them, not justice in the sense that they will ever forget, but ensuring that whoever is guilty of this crime is no longer out and about to commit it again.
So, Bryan, we learned where the victims were found, but what the affidavit cut short of doing was describing the murders itself. So what is missing there?
Yeah, it's the autopsy report. It's the medical examiner's report. We, of course, know it's a homicide. It's not an accident or something, or a natural death. But what I'm looking for, and especially when you read that first page and it says redacted just before it gets into the two victims who were found in the bathroom, what do these injuries look like? Who got more injuries than the others? Did some injuries look more brutal to some victims than to others? We already heard some of that from some of the parents describing the difference of the injuries. But I think if we look into the medical examiner's report, we're going to get a lot more from the picture. So far, the affidavit is telling us who and why they believe it's who, but I want to know the how this all happened. Of course, that sheath gives us more information, and probably that's why we were led to believe that this is that unique Marine or military-used weapon, but I want to know about the injuries. That's going to give us a lot more information.
And basically what you're saying, Bryan, is we don't have the why. We don't have a motive here. And based on the information, Terry, what is the motive here? Why would he have done this? Do you think the prosecution's going to explain the motive? That seems to me to be the central question.
Well, you know, I think there might have been two separate motives here, or potential motives here. And the prosecution, as you know, doesn't have to prove a motive, but it's always nice to be able to explain the story. I think the first motive could have been the fact that he is obsessed with criminology. He has a master's in criminology. He's working towards his PhD. He studied under an expert serial killer who knows how to define and to locate serial killers, not the fact that the professor was a serial killer, but he knows how to find these people. And so I think it's clear that Kohberger is obsessed with this. And, you know, if that's not the motive, and I think that's part of it, he thought he could get away with it, but clearly he didn't. He left, Bryan talked about some of the things that he left behind in terms of his DNA, the shoe print, the car, all of these things. But if that's not the motive, then it could very well be the fact that one of these women might have crossed his path. They probably didn't even know it, because we have seen that these other people were talking about the fact that Kohberger just was arrogant and that he got upset all the time if you turned him down. So I definitely think that that could be an alternate second motive there, but we'll see if the prosecution talks about it.
And we know that based on the evidence, he was possibly tracking them, so planning this. It gives just another indication in all this. Bryan, Terry, great job going through this. Everyone, thanks for joining us. We will see you next time as we discuss justice in America.